Welcome back, everybody. According to the Center for Addiction and Mental Health, feelings of anxiety, depression, and loneliness have risen to the highest levels since spring of 2020. Their findings show that in the past year alone, 25% of Canadians have disclosed needing mental health services to cope with the pandemic and were unable to receive them.
The spike in need for mental health resources begs the question, how is this wave of the pandemic taking a toll on our overall well-being? Here to talk about the collective impact is a psychiatrist from the Center for Addiction and Mental Health, Dr. Juveria Zaheer. We are delighted to have you with us.
Thank you so much for having me today.
Dr. Juveria, welcome to the show. And now, we're over 2 years into this, quote, new normal now. And hearing some of these statistics, it really proves that we're also in the midst of a mental health epidemic in this country. So what kind of mental toll have you seen this wave of the pandemic take on patients?
Well, we know that the COVID-19 pandemic has had a disproportionate impact on people suffering from mental illness. It's not just that they may experience worsening symptoms. They may experience disruption in their service access and care. They may experience trauma and isolation, and they may be scared to get sick or to lose someone that they love. I think it's also really important to point out that people who have serious mental illness, they may experience higher rates of COVID-19 infection and poorer outcomes and lower rates of vaccination. But at the same time, I think we're all suffering from this collective trauma. Our lives have been disrupted completely, and we know that trauma is a risk factor for mental illness. And so I think on a societal level, we're experiencing sadness and anxiety and distress. And it's really important for us to know when those experiences cross the line into impairment or severe distress, and that help and care is available for those who need it.
A study conducted by CAMH also found that in addition to anxiety and feelings of depression, binge drinking in Canadians over 18 years old remains as high as it was last summer. And that's before any COVID-19 vaccines had been approved or rolled out. So what do you think this tells us? Is there a sense of hopelessness being felt right now?
Yeah, I think hope is so important, and holding on through to a thread of hope when things are really dark and overwhelming is so human and so humane and what we need. But I think that, we're inherently storytellers, people are. And when things get tough, we tell ourselves stories of how we got through difficulty in the past or how we had coped with stressors before. But right now, this global pandemic is completely unprecedented in our lifetime. So it's very difficult to know what to expect or to say, I did a good job last time and I'm going to do a great job this time. And so I think when that hope is sort of fading, all we can do is focus on small victories, taking it one day at a time, finding things to look forward to. And I have a colleague who says that sometimes hope can be too big. And so maybe we can transition to possibilities. Can we think about the possibility that things can get better or be otherwise, or the possibility of hope in the future?
I want to stay there for a moment because I'm that kind of person. I like to look forward to things and have goals. That motivates me. That gives me hope. And I think a lot of people were the same, especially during the pandemic. There was this idea that as soon as the vaccines come, it's going to be great and things will change. And then it was, we just have to wait for summer. The weather will be warmer. We can go outside and spend time together. But, with Omicron, and now it's the dead of winter, it feels like during this pandemic, every benchmark that we set, everything we looked forward to came with a setback. So how is this affecting our mental health?
I think these setbacks are so hard. They can feel almost impossible. And I see this in the patients that I see at work, but also in our personal lives as well. And I think we will want to look forward to things. And what happens with the setbacks is just when we think we have a handle on things or we can feel the ground steady underneath us, things shift. And then we feel like we can't expect good things to happen, or we can't predict what the world will look like. And when people experience a lot of difficulty and adversity, especially when they're young, the world can feel like a really scary place, and people may not feel safe to be around, or we can't predict what will happen. And I think we're sort of experiencing that together right now, where we can't really predict what will happen, and the setbacks feel even harder than they might normally.
So is it important for us to be setting goals for ourselves right now as something to look forward to? And what are some examples that would be beneficial?
I love this question, and it's a question I often ask to patients as well. It's what do you have to look forward to? And I think right now the scale of looking forward has shifted, both in terms of what we look forward to and timelines. But I think finding small things is really important. I have a person I work with who says, gardening is something I'm looking forward to because the pandemic cannot take that away from me. Another person talks about watching every James Bond movie with his girlfriend in order on the weekends, and that's something they look forward to together. And thinking about my own family, I have two little girls, and every weekend on Friday we have Family Room Friday. And they get to pick the takeout, and they get to pick what they watch, and they get to eat in front of the TV. And it seems so small, but for them, it's like the biggest thing in the whole wide world. And I think, though, I also want to point out that options are a sign of privilege. Like if you are blessed to have financial security and housing security and food security, you have many more options available to you. And I think, especially on a day like today, we need to remember that mental health is health, and health also includes freedom from trauma and oppression, the financial support to live a safe and dignified life, and safe housing and access to food. And I hope we can get there societally, and I think we're on the right track.
Well, I think that's a great point because just like with any crisis, it disproportionately affects marginalized communities. So how has this pandemic, what impact has it had on marginalized communities around Canada?
Well, we know that Black, Indigenous, and people of color have poorer outcomes from the COVID-19 pandemic, and that's because of things like systemic racism, difficulty accessing care, poorer quality of care. And at the same time, these same communities prior to the pandemic also have greater difficulty accessing mental health care services and poorer outcomes in the mental health system. So we can think about how these two layers of marginalization can interact and can make us feel really concerned. Another group of people that we really want to think about are people who don't feel safe at home. So people who have experienced intimate partner violence, for example, or LGBTQ2S Canadians who don't live in a gender-affirming space. And it's very difficult when you're stuck at home and you don't feel safe there. And I think about these folks a lot. And in our work in the emergency department, we really worry about Canadians who are experiencing multiple types of marginalization. So Canadians with disabilities, Canadians who have been incarcerated, people with precarious housing or who don't have housing. And we really need to think about if this is a time where having more empathy for each other because we're all going through this really hard thing, then thinking about how we can invest in a mental health care system that actually meets the needs of every Canadian and meets them where they're at and creates interventions with them that work for them.
That's beautiful, and it gives me a sense of hope, but I still think there's this collective feeling of anger in this particular wave, a mix of both fatigue and anger that has impacted even the most resilient of us. So how do we cope with emotions that might have turned from exhaustion to rage?
I can very much feel you on the rage. I think when this pandemic started, we thought, okay, we're going to get through this together and we just have to be strong and there will be hope for us. And I think I still believe that. I still think we're going to get through this, but it's taken a long time and it's harder to hold on to that. I think with anger, there's a few things to think about. I think one is that anger is actually a normal feeling. As long as you're not harming yourself or anybody else, it's okay to feel anger. And I think especially as women, we're socializing not to express anger or not to experience anger. But it's okay to be angry, especially right now. And the second thing I'll say is that anger is a complex or secondary emotion. So you know how when you mix paint, yellow and blue makes green, for example. Anger is usually a mix of feelings. So to ask ourselves, are we sad? Are we tired? Are we frustrated? Are we lonely? And to kind of address those feelings and to ask for help when we need it. And I think finally, if there's ways that we can take care of ourselves and unplug, we are surrounded by COVID. We can doom scroll on Twitter. We can watch the news and we can talk to our friends about it. But to kind of give yourself the space to say, I need to take a break. I need to check out and I will re-engage in a way that feels safe for me. I think that's a really important strategy as well.
It's been so helpful having you on the show today, Dr. Juveria. Thank you so much. And also thank you for your efforts in bringing awareness to mental health and helping people who are struggling with their mental health. If you or love someone or someone you love is struggling with mental health right now, please visit camh.ca for a list of helpful resources, and we'll be right back.